Good afternoon and welcome to the Herald's Rugby World Cup show. These are a series we're doing out throughout the tournament, and we're here the day after Scotland's opening game to South Africa. It's not the result we wanted to be talking about today, but we'll talk about it nonetheless in as much detail as we can. I'm delighted to be joined by Stuart Bathgate, rugby expert today. Stuart, how are we?
Fine, thanks.
As you both know, we're not in France. We're not the lucky ones to be over there at the moment. We're stuck in... Well, I'm in Glasgow, Stuart. Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Edinburgh.
Edinburgh. So we've got the two big cities covered in today's show. Let's dive right into the game. 18-3 to South Africa, obviously playing the reigning champions. It was far from an easy opening game for Scotland. What were your overall kind of assessments and takeaways from the game?
First of all, I didn't expect Scotland to win, but I did expect them to make more of a contest. I think the last time Scotland only scored 3 points was against Ireland at the last World Cup. So to just have one penalty to show for all your efforts is not great. Having said that, you've got to accept that the South Africans are world champions for a reason. They're a really good team, and they specifically know how to shut down Scotland. They did that really well. It's not just one team that are bigger, stronger, faster than the other. South Africa were smarter. They knew how to use their physical strength. And that's why Scotland didn't have any opportunities, really. It was so in that sense, a lot of it was predictable. But the one other takeaway that I would have is it's not changed that much for Scotland. They still have to beat Ireland, which they might well have had to do anyway. You know, if you beat one of the big two in your group, you'd still depend on other results. But what I'm trying to say is that it's not the end of the world, basically, I think.
Yeah, no, I concur with that. It looks like it's going to come down to the Ireland game. Points, totals could be significant as well. So, you know, look at the next two games coming up, and it's important that Scotland win and win handsomely as well. Just before we kind of look on to what lies ahead, it seemed in the first half, certainly, I thought Scotland competed really well. And it was that kind of 2 to 3 minute period at the start of the second half where, you know, South Africa got those two scores, and it kind of really, you know, put them in the ascendancy and put the game beyond Scotland's reach.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a problem for Scotland in recent games. You know, that they'll just go to sleep is too harsh a way to say it, but their concentration will lapse, or their performance levels will lapse. Lose 2 scores to South Africa at any time, and you're in trouble. But like that, back to back, we were suddenly going from a game that was maybe still on the balance, at least Scotland could get back into it, to a game which was frankly beyond them. And then South Africa could control it from that point. They could adopt tactics to close the game down, which, as I said, is the one thing that they really excel at.
Yeah, just kind of looking at the first half in general, I mean, there wasn't too many opportunities for Scotland to score a try. There wasn't too many opportunities in the whole game for Scotland to go over that line. But the best one, and perhaps the one that, you know, people in the Scotland camp be looking back at today with a little bit of regret, was it was a fantastic line-out move, and it culminated in Finn Russell popping it off to Darcy Graham, and he broke through. And, you know, the talk now, the fallout is, should they have passed the ball? Should they have dummied first, then passed? Or what should they have done in that situation, Stuart?
I got the impression watching it live that he thought he'd be intercepted if he passed. So I wouldn't blame Darcy Graham for being greedy at that point. I think he made the wrong decision thinking he didn't have time to get his pass away. And you have Blair Kinghorn and Duan van der Merwe outside him. Get the ball to Kinghorn, who beats one man. There's at most one defender left. Get the ball to van der Merwe, and he's going to beat more than one defender easily. So it was a mistake. Maybe he backed himself to finish, because he is quite good at finishing, as we know. But it is a big what-if moment from that game, the biggest, in fact.
Yeah, I think Graham certainly backed himself. You know, he's got an excellent try record for Scotland. I think it's 19 and 30 or 35. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a fantastic record. But just you mentioned him there, Van der Merwe. Scotland really didn't get the ball in his hands enough throughout the game, did they? I can't remember too many times when he received the ball in open space, or even received the ball, you know, at all. During the game. Do you think that'll be something that Gregor Townsend looks back at and, you know, wishes it could have went differently, or is that just a credit to, you know, South Africa's rush defence?
Well, I think it's mainly a credit to South Africa in the sense that the ball never got close to Duhan on the wing for a reason. Is that if they do have a blitz defence, they close you down, Sione Tuipulotu at 12 was carrying a lot as opposed to distributing it. So he takes the ball into contact. The South Africans flood the breakdown. And either they turn it over there or they slow it down enough so Scotland have to start again from 9. And there's still as many passes away from Duhan on the wing. So it's a difficult one. I think really you credit South Africa with shutting Scotland down. But as you say, by the same token, Gregor will have to look at that and think, if Tonga or Romania play like that, we don't expect them to defend so well. But if they learn and defend very smartly, how are we going to make sure that we get Duhan into the game? Because Duhan on the ball is obviously one of Scotland's biggest strengths.
Yeah, just in terms of the only scoring 3 points, you made a good point to me off camera about this. Is that a concern? Scotland only registering 3 points in the whole game.
It is a concern, and again, it's actually, if you look at the results from the opening weekend, nobody else scored as few points as 3. Namibia scored 8, Romania scored 8. They were no hopers, and they still managed. Maybe that's because their opponents knew they could let them score the odd try. But I'm sure the last time Scotland only scored 3 was against Ireland at the last World Cup. And you've got to look at the fact that South Africa and Ireland are the two teams, not only because they're numbers 1 and 2 in the world, but because they're the two teams that know how to shut down this Scotland team's style of play. So it's a long-standing problem, really. It won't be a problem against Tonga or Romania. If you only score 3 points against them, you may as well pack up and go home before you play Ireland. But it is something that I think the coaches might look at doing something more or less experimental in the next 2 games to work out how they can cope with the sort of defence that Ireland will present to them.
Yeah, no, completely agree. We need to talk about the controversial moment in the game. That was Jesse Creel's tackle on Jack Dempsey early on. It looked like a head-on collision. It wasn't picked up by the officials. TMO didn't have a look at it, and I think certainly my view is why the spotlight shines on it so brightly, and why it's so heightened was because of what happened just the night before. The game before England v Argentina on Saturday night, with Tom Curry receiving a red after the TMO flagged it up. What was your take on that? Were you surprised that the TMO didn't flag up, considering what happened just the day before?
Yeah, I was surprised, but I'll be maybe a wee bit too charitable and say TMOs are human like the rest of us. They make mistakes. An interesting point was the guys in the stadium said that wasn't replayed there. They didn't see it on French TV either. And in fact, watching it at home on TV, on ITV, STV, they talked about it at half-time, I think, but I can't remember if they got to it midway through the half. Maybe they did. Anyway, it wasn't immediately obvious. TMOs are limited in the number of cameras they can look at once, the number of angles they can see it from. It's an unfortunate mistake, but I think whether you're talking about VAR in football, hockey and tennis, or a couple of individuals in an outside broadcast truck in rugby, mistakes will continue to be made as long as humans are the officials. And I wouldn't want it any other way, to be honest. That maybe sounds a bit too forgiving, but I think we have to accept that there will not be total consistency. And as Gregor Townsend said, look at Tom Curry, sent off in the 3rd minute. Does it stop England from winning the game? No. Could South Africa win with 14 men? Of course they could. Yeah,
no, I tend to agree. It's inconsistency. I think it frustrates a lot of people, especially when there's 2 incidents which are pretty similar and they fall so close together. I mean, looking forward for Scotland now, kind of 2-week break, and obviously got no game next weekend, head into their next game. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is it a case of getting the work done in the training ground? I know Gregor said that the players will have a few days off to relax and spend time with their families, or would you want to play the next game straight away to kind of get back to it?
No, you don't need to play the next game straight away. I think a few days off is good. I think, as we were saying earlier, you take a few days off, you come back into it, you decide it's the start of a new tournament, win your next 3 games, and you've got a pretty good chance of being in the quarterfinals of the World Cup. Any player in that squad would take that scenario. And I'm sure they'll have the right mindset once you've had a few days off to not forget about the Springboks game entirely, but at least to digest it and stop beating themselves up about it.
Yeah. What was your take? I don't know if did you take in see much of the Ireland game against Romania?
Not seen much of it, no, but go on.
Yeah, no, just in terms of, I mean, I think we all know what to expect from Ireland. You know, they're one of the best sides in the world. I know it's the last game, but it's probably going to be the most important one. I mean, do you expect that to be? What do you expect them to pose to Scotland in terms of problems and difficulties?
Well, first of all, the reason I only watched the highlights of the Ireland game is I think what they do against Romania is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Well, they scored a bucket load of points, so presuming that's not their first choice side, it's obvious that they got strength and depth in the squad. But we knew that anyway. I think, as I said, they might be a wee bit annoyed that they conceded 8 points to Romania. They might have hoped for something tighter, even tighter than 82-8, just as a practice. I think, and then Scotland, they will do something pretty close to what South Africa did. They'll try and shut Scotland down, especially Finn Russell, and they'll try and manage the game on their terms, changing the tempo, preventing it becoming too fast, winding the clock down once they've got a lead.
Yeah, just lastly on the Scotland game before we move on. Sorry, pardon me. Before we move on to the rest of the tournament, I also read your rating piece last night. I think you thought Finn Russell was probably Scotland's pick of the bunch, or one of the picks of the bunch. What players impressed you the most from Scotland's performance yesterday?
Well, Finn, because he saved 2 tries in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So for your playmaker to be the one who gets back there in the last 5, one shows massive commitment and also really high levels of fitness to do that. I mean, he wasn't at his attacking best, but he was still the one player more likely than anyone else to flick that switch and make something happen. The other one was Jack Dempsey, who is, given that Finn varies in consistency a wee bit, not as much as he used to, but he still does. I think Jack Dempsey is probably the most consistently high-performing member of the team. He doesn't do everything right, but he's as close as you can get in that squad to doing things right. He's an intelligent and very physical, dynamically physical player as well. So Finn for the backs, Jack Dempsey for the forwards.
Yeah, let's just talk about the opening weekend as a whole, because what have you made of it? I hold my hands up. I didn't watch the start of the France-New Zealand game the other night because Scotland were obviously playing in the football. So as being a patriotic person, I had to watch the first half of that, certainly until he went 3 goals up, and then you kind of switch over and watch the rugby. But as a weekend as a whole, I mean, what have you made of it? There's been excitement. There's also that England-Argentina game, which was a kind of war of attrition and forward kicking, 3 drop goals in the first half, and them getting over the line with 14 men for pretty much the whole game. And then the game of the tournament for me probably came last night when Wales and Fiji put on a really entertaining game, and also came down to the last pass, didn't it? And Fiji, if he'd caught the ball, he would have got over the try line and made it a big conversion to see who won the game.
Yeah, I'd agree, actually. I think the tournament really came alive last night with that Wales-Fiji game. For the French, it came alive on Friday night when they beat New Zealand. And I wouldn't underplay the significance of that. But given the history of that fixture in particular, it wasn't a classic. It was a fairly, maybe for the neutrals, an unexciting start. The England-Argentina game, even if you wanted England to win, it was disappointing from a spectacle point of view. Argentina were dreadful. Hopefully they won't play again as badly again in the coming games. And then Scotland-South Africa was one-sided. But Wales-Fiji was a magnificent match. Maybe too many mistakes on both sides to be called a real classic. Too many kicks as well, which is one theme of the opening weekend. And also bizarrely, given how too conventional, too conservative a game plan from Fiji, given what they can do with the ball in hand, as they showed in their early tries, they just kept battering away. And how many tries did they cough up in the end? 3 over the line? And then that one by Randrandra at the end when he knocked on. Mm-hmm. They should have won that game. But despite the mistakes, despite the things that went wrong, it was just an end-to-end classic. So I was delighted I decided to watch it, despite my disappointment at the South Africa result.
Yeah, no, I think it's certainly been a good weekend. Was there anything that kind of surprised you, or is it went as expected? Is there anything that stood out to you in terms of, maybe kind of the implementation of some of the rules or players in particular?
Let's think. No, I suppose given that, what had France lost? 13 out of the last 14 against New Zealand, a big stat. you might say that was a surprise, and France have, failed to live up to expectation before. Last time they were at home in a World Cup opener, for example, they lost to Argentina. I was surprised by how poor Argentina were against England, and maybe a bit surprised about how well England played, especially at halfback. I thought what's the best way of describing it? They just played more rugby than they're used to. I don't think Steve Borthwick, their coach, is really into playing a terribly modern brand of rugby. I mean, he was a big no-nonsense forward, and he likes to have his players play a big no-nonsense style of game. And they had a bit more to them than that, and they were deserved winners from that. So on the whole, no real shocks. A bit of refereeing controversy, which I think is obligatory now, isn't it? You always get that with a series of games.
Yeah, it's interesting. We touched on it before we came on. I mean, the kind of inconsistencies, and rugby is such a hard sport to kind of referee because you can have different interpretations of almost every breakdown and every tackle. And I suppose that's why the TMO is there to provide that kind of second opinion. But certainly last night there was kind of a lot of furore over the fact that I think Fiji were shown a yellow card after one foul in their 22, whereas Wales were repeatedly warned, and then they didn't pick up that second yellow card in the closing stages. But you don't want the kind of whole tournament to kind of centre around refereeing controversy. Scotland have obviously had that in the past at World Cup. So, but overall, you think it's been a positive, first 3 days to the World Cup?
Yeah, I do actually. I don't think you should expect much of round one of games in any tournament, because we saw the last tournament, South Africa lost their first game and they went on to win. So it's not the end of the world if for teams who lose. And it's like anything. It's like the Champions League group stages. I mean, they only really get interesting for a lot of teams once you get to that third round of games, when your teams are playing simultaneously and they may have to vary their tactics according to whether the game becomes a points chase rather than just win, lose, or draw. But no, I'd say it was a solid, maybe 7 out of 10 start, maybe verging on an 8, given how good Wales-Fiji was.
Yeah, completely. So before we go, I'll mention Kyle Steyn. Do you think he could come into contention for the next two games? Obviously, he was left out against South Africa.
Yeah, I've got a really high opinion of Kyle Steyn. I think he's really good at everything. His defence is excellent. In fact, it's a lot better than either of the two winners who started last night, to be honest. What's his try-scoring stats? Something like 9 and 13 or 14?
Spot on, 9 and 13, I believe, off the top of my head. So
right.
We've got that right.
No, good, in other words. He's just a really intelligent, responsible, conscientious and mindful, I suppose, rugby player. I mean, he's very conscious of what's going on. He doesn't lose his head or anything like that. It all depends on what the coaches want to do for Tonga. Do they feel that they'll probably select something pretty close to their first choice, given the need to win, and then maybe vary it a bit more for the Romania game? Could he come into the team? Yeah, he could, and he'd certainly do a good job. And there's a few other changes that I think Gregor might consider, such as at hooker. George Turner's thrown in wasn't the best, even if you think sometimes the jumpers got it wrong. I think Dave Cherry's got a good chance of starting next time round as well. And then maybe just to freshen it up, maybe 2 or 3 other changes too.
It's a good point with the line, because it didn't function very well yesterday. It didn't really give Scotland that platform to build the attacking game that I know they're capable of in the backs. I think I read a stat earlier, they lost 6 lineouts in the South Africa 22, which is, if you can't win your own lineouts in the South Africa 22, what chance do you have of scoring? So yeah, it's a really good point, actually, Stuart. That must be an area that Gregor Townsend will be looking at, and maybe in personnel or maybe how they do things, they'll be looking to address that.
Probably both, because I think any hooker who gets to international level knows how to throw a ball straight.
True.
So it's not just down to the hooker making mistakes all the time. Sometimes, as I said, the jumpers get it wrong. It's also been a long-standing problem. It's not just George Turner who gets the throw wrong. Dave Cherry's probably got the best stats about it, I would guess, but he's capable of mistakes, and so is Euan Ashman. And Stuart McInally, who's out hovering around as a reserve just now because Ashman picked up a training injury, he can do the same thing. So it's one of these longer-standing problems that can't be fixed just by one change in personnel. How it can be fixed, I guess you'd have to ask line-out specialists to find the answer to that one.
Yeah, and that's a great note to leave it. I mean, thanks very much for joining us today, Stuart. You'll be with us throughout the tournament. This has been the first week of our live videos. We had one after Gregor Townsend's team announcement on Friday. We went live to the stadium yesterday before kick-off, and we've done this kind of review after the game. Considering there's no game for 2 weeks, we're going to have to look at how we do them to keep the coverage coming over the next few weeks. We will start to push these more on our social media channels. But thanks to everyone who has joined us today and who has joined us in our first few videos. We do appreciate it. And Stuart, thank you very much for your time too.
Thank you.